Hello, everybody. We are here on the sacred land, and what's the name of it again?
Chochenyo Karkin Ohlone people, the ancestral land of the Chochenyo Karkin Ohlone people.
Yes, we are honored to be here. So this is our next episode here. A lot of things happening that we want to share with you, and so we're going to get right to it. My name is Consuelo Lara.
I'm Madeline Cronenberg, and we welcome you to Between Two Teachers. And I did want to say something about the sacred land. Something really interesting happened this week with respect to our Native communities. And they got a huge win in the Supreme Court yesterday. Massive win, which allows which recognizes the fact that a big percentage of Oklahoma is actually on Native territory, including the city of Tulsa. And that is a giant change. Yes. So they're now looking at how everything will change in terms of how their community is governed, because they have to look into what has always been the case, right? The rights of the tribal community that were taken away from them years ago. So it's fascinating that this particular Supreme Court that we have today gave it back to them, or just recognized that it never should have been taken away. So
Yep.
Three cheers for them.
And the big for us is the opening of schools. Of course, everybody may know there's a framework that's been released, that was released yesterday. And today there's going to be a town hall where the plan is going to be released. And I know we have a lot of questions about it, and I know there's lots of confusion out there about this plan. And you know, one size does not fit all. It seems like every district has decided on something different. So
they have. There's been a big push and pull, right? The American Association of Pediatricians has said that everybody needs to go back full time, and the California Teachers Association has said no one can go back until it's safe. So there you go.
There's just so much confusion. And of course, for me as a former teacher, I think about the teachers are rolling this out, but teachers don't feel safe in their health. And you're putting them at risk. Like, oh yeah, you guys all just go back. Well, no, that's not that simple.
So what's interesting is West Contra Costa's team, like I'm looking at it, Vision 2020 vision, came up with an all online choice. So that, and the way they framed it is the classroom is with the teacher. So every teacher will spend every day teaching her or his classroom students online. But there will be an opportunity for families to come into a site, and that's called a hub. Right, and so that's unclear right now at this moment because this whole thing hasn't been explained yet. But it says that students are admitted to a student support hub, which is a school with social distancing standards in place, and the students will be in small cohorts with instructional aides. So the teachers might not be there, just the aides. Also, childcare credentialed staff, before and after school workers, or credentialed teachers. That's the information. And then there would be tiered admission to the Student Support Hub according to student-centered needs, up to the capacity and workforce demands. And hopefully that's to support the workforce needs of our families, right? So in addition to the families that have issues with connectivity, there are also the families that have to go to work.
Yeah, that's that has to be addressed for sure. Yeah.
So, but there it is, and that's going to come out today. In addition to every other district in the state of California, the way this is played out across the country is there are some states that the state has the authority to determine how everybody comes back. California is not one of those states. California has each district have the authority to decide how children come back. And it just is different from each community. I heard this morning that Palo Alto is on its 4th version of its plan. Right, and this final version that they're on, or it may not be the final version, but the one they have as of this morning, they are now going to have all of their secondary students go completely online. And before that, they were apparently going to do some sort of a hybrid. Right.
Oh, yeah, and it could change again because things change so quickly.
Right, and everyone will change. That's the whole thing, because the idea is we do all want to get back, but what it's going to take to get back, whether it's daily testing of some sort, right? If they develop the 15-minute test, people are talking about being able to walk into an office building and spit into a tube, and then that will decide whether or not you get on the elevator to go upstairs to work. Right? Oh, but the same thing would be true at schools. And there are school districts or big universities that are saying they're going to test everybody in the organization twice a week.
Wow.
But you have to have the ability to do that, right? And that's, no one's providing that to the children and the school staffs in California.
And and just like the testing, all of that is again an equity issue for us. Some people have so much access to these things, and some people have none. And then so much inequity to address there.
Right. There's all of it, and it's a strange thing because there's also the inequity. The virus doesn't care, right? So the virus is just marching on around wherever it's going, and the issues around the inequities with the virus are the people who can't stay home and protect themselves from it. That's the real inequity issue, right? And even with school staff, if you actually look at it, well, who is it in the school staff that's the essential worker that has to go in? The custodian. You can't do it on Zoom.
No, that's right. And so how those inequity issues play out within the school system as well.
Right, and the food service, that's the other one.
A big one, food service.
Right, both of those. So all of that has to be figured out. And of course, we have our federal government, Mr. Voss and the president. I actually posted the 3-hour thing they did the other day in the White House on reopening schools, which they are basically saying, oh, well, you can reopen them without any sense of the reality of what they're saying. Because you can't. Because you can't. And it's not that you don't want to. It's that it's not safe. It's just not safe until it's safe.
But they want people to get sick and die. That's what they're doing. They're setting it up for that.
It is. It's a very, very unfair system. It really is. But it is bringing up all of the issues of inequity. So that's it is bringing up the education justice now in these times, I think, has risen to about such a high level because of what everybody is going through, right?
Yeah. And so that, the COVID-19, opening of schools, the health issues around that, that is right in the forefront, as well as all the racial injustice, the racial issues that are going on as well. And protests are still happening.
Absolutely.
And hate crimes are still happening. And I, as a retired teacher, I had to do some really reflecting on our school district, on practices that we have that we need to change, that really when I, in analysis, you look at and say, in terms of the consequences, that's really racist. That really has a basis in racism.
Mm-hmm.
So I identified, if we have time here, I can share
Yes.
those right
Yes.
I think these are really, and like I said, these are things we need to analyze in terms of their racist roots, etc.
Right.
One of the big ones has to do with school boundaries. Now, many times school boundaries, if you look at them, they're just like our city boundaries, whatever, and our housing boundaries, they are pretty much about class and race. They're not around, traffic or transportation or, convenience of the people. No, they're oftentimes to exclude certain people and to include others. So they're often a basis for segregation, for sure. And there's a history of that in this country. So that's a big one, and I'm hoping that we can look at those and consider that. Not that we're going to change it overnight, but the first step is you have to admit you have a problem. That's the first step. And I also looked at several issues around teaching and learning. Our textbooks, our multi-million-dollar commercial publishers of textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
Of their, especially history books, well, all of their books are very Eurocentric and can be very oppressively racist in their content.
Right.
So they're not centered, they're very, and then I remember the pressure. You got these brand new books, you got to get through them, you've got to prepare them for these tests. And then usually at the end, you're testing them on something you never taught because there's that disconnect. Those textbooks are often useless. And they draw teachers away from doing what they know really works, that high quality teaching that they've developed through their years of experience. And you have to put that aside because you got to teach the textbook. And so we have to look beyond. There are movements beyond textbooks, open source education programs. We don't have to reinvent the wheel about this, but we do have to look at how those books are oppressively racist and how they affect our children, children of color, and all children, really. And that ties very closely in with ethnic studies. How is it that we don't have ethnic studies requirements and have had them for years? Because of the number of children of color, students of color we've had. Ethnic studies should be institutionalized for all of our children. And so that was another one. And then the effect that it has on children of color, how empowering it is. And it reminded me back when I was studying about colonization, and the first thing that the colonizers who came to a new land to take it over is they take away the people's culture and their language. And so this is a way we need to give that culture and that history of that culture in order to empower these children of color. So it just is really necessary for so many reasons at so many levels. And then tied into that also is the standardized testing. Now, I don't know, I wrote a piece for, I think it's in the Richmond Standard, about standardized testing and how it affects, labels, stigmatizes, and places kids almost like a punishment into different categories. And you won't get into GATE. You couldn't get into AP unless you have these certain test scores. And so for some people it works, but not everybody. In fact, sometimes it's damaging to some students, the children of color. So that's another one. And the fact that that's what's used to recruit for the charter schools, that meaningless number, which they publicize everywhere. And it means nothing really, except it means who could take this test. That's useless for really evaluating. It's not accurate at all for students. And the last couple ones, the hiring practices. We need teachers who look like the children they're teaching. Our children need to see teachers, principals, district office people who look like them. So they see that, oh yeah, something I could do too. The role modeling, we all know that. And yet we can't somehow achieve that. And
We
that,
don't grow them. The only way to achieve that is to grow them. That's, and that has been one of the decisions that we've chosen not to do. Look at how hard we've tried to work to get an education academy, which is the basic step you have to take in order to have a diverse staff to teach your children. And there are barrier after barrier after barrier to putting it together, which doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it's just, that's how you do it, because no one is going to magically appear. You have to grow that community.
Proactively.
Right.
These students and grow them. And that's how you do it in an anti-racist way. We often use the phrase equity lens.
Mm-hmm.
We need to to an anti-racist lens.
Yes.
So doing specifically. And that's what I'm doing here. Is I was thinking about specific things. The last one I have is about the school to prison pipeline and about suspensions. And I really, I'm a teacher, so I'm talking about teachers, how it feels like a child's rap sheet starts when they start getting all of those referrals, the paper referrals,
Mm-hmm.
detention, then they go and they get suspended. I mean, right there, they've already started in kindergarten, first grade, and look at the numbers. There's a small percentage that may be in the school of, let's say, African American students, but yet when you look at the percentage of suspensions, they're the dominant number. So there's inequity right there. That is racism, and we've got to look at that. And it's going to take a lot of teacher reflection and professional development and anti-racist.
It's going to take a lot of professional development around implicit bias training and really understanding that the new word is not implicit bias. Is a very middle of the road kind of word. I think it's the wrong word. That's why I think the anti-racist is such an important word, because we all have bias. Oh, I have bias for a certain color. Bias sort of means what's your favorite, and you're allowed to have favorites, bias, but you're not allowed to be racist, right? So anti-racist is really what I think has to become the term that we're using. It's not middle of the road. You can't be middle of the road. You have to be against this behavior, which has been a scourge on our community, on our country for all these years. And I think that's what you're talking about. You're talking about an anti-racist platform, an anti-racist education platform.
And all of them, I think, are doable. Some of them are right away. Others are going to take a long time, but they are still doable. And again, I just want us to look at them. I want us to think about them and to recognize that these are issues directly affect students and can make our students of color more successful in schools. So these are things you'll hear me talking more about them more. Maybe I'll bring in examples and things like that. Madeline, you just reminded me about the power of words and the evolution of words. Remember back when we used to say, we're going to teach tolerance?
Yes.
Tolerance. And then finally somebody said, you know what? I don't want to be tolerated. Don't you? And then we dropped that. We don't use that anymore. Because that's
right.
not a word.
Because tolerance was looked at as the virtue. But tolerance basically says that whatever the antipathy is that somebody has is okay. It's okay if you don't like him. Well, the deal isn't whether you like him, it's how you're going to behave and the structures that are put in place to support people and to suppress other people, and recognizing that those structures are there. And also understanding who has, the other thing that we don't teach our children at all, and that goes along with this, is that as much as some children are oppressed and some communities are oppressed, others are privileged. So what is the pathology of privilege? I used to teach my students this. The pathology of privilege is you think you have to understand what comes with it. What are the expectations that you have built in, the implicit expectations that you have built into your privileged lens? And when are you using it and when are you not using it?
Yeah.
You're using it all the time because that's what you're using. And that's through that privileged lens that all of the textbooks are written and that all of these other decisions got made. Right? So then you say, all right, then what is the person with the privilege now required to do? What steps do they have to take in order to even things up? That is a big conversation that hadn't been happening. That doesn't happen in the tolerance community. You're saying teach tolerance. Yeah, well, fine. I'm not required to do anything if I'm on the privileged side of it. If you're teaching anti-racism, you got to move over and you got to take action.
The power of words, isn't that true? Words have so much.
Very true. But its time has come. So it's a really interesting time. So all of this is, I am putting this out there, Consuelo Laura is running for Contra Costa County School Board.
Yes, I am. And thank you for that. And I think I just laid out a lot of my platform right here.
Yes, you did.
I may have had a lot of priorities before, but with this crisis in racial justice and in health, we don't have time to sit around and talk and waste. I'm about action, and I want to see some of these things changed. So you'll be hearing more about that. I want to post more. I want to get into more detail because these are not easy things, and they are not easy conversations to have, for sure.
No, but they're important conversations to have, and that's what everyone has to recognize. We have to do things that are, if we don't do it now, all we're doing is pushing it over to our children and our grandchildren to have conversations that we now know are the ones we need to have. We don't have to have the tolerance conversation. We need to have the anti-racist conversation and the conversations around privilege and how it does pathologize everything we do.
Yeah. All right.
I just want to point out what I have put on here. I did put some links to the Ed Justice folks and the lists of important things that they're looking at in the education justice community, and actually through NEA, the National Education Association, who I have great respect for, and who now you can tell is moving very strongly towards the importance of education justice and has a lot to say about it, developing the teaching materials that people need. There's also, in the reopening world, to help you reopen, different groups of people have done the research, and I think the best one that I did put up here is from MIT. They have a whole school reopening set of strategies to look at and understand which strategy, what strategies you really want to use. And the first one they talked about that I thought was the most important was preserving relationships. And in there, they had a whole thing on looping, which we've talked about here, but they had it. It was in the MIT thing. It was right. They had this whole page on saying this is one of, and all of the places that they went to where schools had done it, including a school that did it and had the 6th grade teacher was a K6. She went down to kindergarten.
Wow.
And they said that there were people that didn't like it as much, and mainly what they didn't like was having to teach a different curriculum. But it's not that different. If you're going, and it is for her from the 6 to K, it was different. But for everybody else, it was, one up. But anyway, that was one of the things that was in there. So I commend that to anybody who's looking at it. And then the other 2 things I just wanted to mention that came up this week, especially in our district, if children are going to stay home, there are programs out there where you can get online coaching. So the Khan Academy has something called Schoolhouse World, and there are tutors from all over the world who will help you with what you need to be helped with. And the other thing is people can volunteer to be a tutor with the Khan Academy and be connected to a student somewhere. And this is a really unique opportunity to become a global tutor or to get somebody from somewhere, anywhere in the world to help you. And MIT does the same thing. They use their students to coach their other students. And I'm hopeful that maybe that West Contra Costa will be able to do that as well and have older students go, and they could do it online. They may be able to do it in person, but mentor and support the children who are in the digital classrooms of their teachers. And that's, what else did I have in here? Oh, there are two other things. I just want to say there still is, if you want to take action, there still is a bill, HR 40, in a federal bill in the House to explore reparations. And I'm a big believer we should be exploring reparations. Reparations shouldn't, this is the moment. If reparations is going to happen, it's now. And so it's worth looking at it and doing the exploration and supporting that. So I have a link to do that. And also having, exploring quality education as a constitutional right. That is a big deal because that reframes our emphasis on how we do funding, right? How it elevates education to where it belongs. And so I went to a webinar the other day on that, and I put the link to that in there as well. And the only other thing, we have news this week about John Henry. Did you watch it?
Yeah, a lot of it. It went on for a long, long time.
I know.
And, they almost like rubber stamp. They did the other one, the other charter schools they approved, and then they
put in, they approved it, and they did, however, give it some I don't know, some conditions, but they were conditions that you know, have to do with governance issues that were brought up. But yeah, John Henry was approved, and so it continues on. So the John Henry saga is over for now. And it has 5 more years. The only thing that's interesting about it is that it comes back in 5 years. It doesn't go back up to the state because the state's not going to have, in the past, they would have then been approved, authorized by the state. But now they are still going to be approved by the district. And in 5 years, they'll come back to the district, whoever's on the district board for approval.
Yep, that was there.
Yeah. That's that. And then I wanted to do a shout out to, we had talked about the importance of building community for all of our online classrooms. And I put together a playlist on our YouTube channel of many different teachers and webinars specifically about building community for K through higher education. And it is a real conversation. And when you watch them, right, there are some of them. There was one particular teacher, Mr. Cook, Mr. Cook's Corner. I'm going to give a shout out to Mr. Cook because Mr. Cook is very clear, and we've gone on here much longer than Mr. Cook goes on, and in his 12 minutes, he helps you come away with very specific ideas that will make sure that you connect with all of your children every day in fun and playful ways. And right, and if you don't have the natural instinct to do it, and not everybody does. I mentioned my son, he did it, but he did it by throwing popcorn to his dog every day and having everybody in the 8th grade guess how many popcorns would Ditto catch, and the winner, whoever guessed it right, would win a prize. And that became a big thing in Ditto Datland down in New Orleans. But teachers have to figure out what works for them, and this young teacher really does give you some support in doing that. And even if you're not a teacher, it's worth watching just to see how inspiring he is, I think, and all of the folks that are building community. It's just it's a really inspiring kind of thing. So that's that. It leads us to, do you have a shout out? You want to do a shout out?
You know, there's a group of people that are camping out on City Hall about military sexual abuse and a case that has not been,
right,
you know, pursued, and they're yeah. So, and apparently it's getting bigger and bigger, and this is something, you know, that has been ignored. Another area that's really been ignored, the women in the military. And this person was from Richmond, who lost her life. So there's community people who are bringing attention to it. So a shout out to them, to people. These protests are going on. There's another one going on in Martinez, where on Sunday, 4 o'clock, I believe, because they had a permit to put the Black Lives Matter out on the street, and then someone decided they could just paint over it. And those two people are going to be charged because this is a hate crime. And so now we're going to have a protest over there. So we keep on moving. We keep pushing. So a shout out to them who are still out there organizing. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop.
No, that is the one thing that's clear now. It's not going to stop. Yeah. And you know, I do believe that a big reason it's not going to stop is because we have social media. And you know, I mean, years ago it would stop because you'd lose the energy, and you didn't have the organizing, the opportunities to organize that folks have today. Just like years ago, if the pandemic had happened, we would be home doing nothing.
I know. What
would we do? I mean, they'd put it on public TV, and we'd be watching public TV all day. But there would not be any of the options that we have today. They just simply wouldn't exist, right? And so the fact that people are looking at all the stuff they're looking at today, it's because we have this. We have the ability to communicate.
Awesome. Okay.
Do we have any comedy from Carlos? He did send
some. I got him here.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
What kind of joke is allowed during quarantine?
Oh, a quarantine joke. I don't know. What kind of joke?
Inside joke.
Oh, Carlos never disappoints. He never disappoints.
The lighter in him.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Be sure to tune in to the town hall today, and then we'll hear what else is happening. There is an endless amount of education news happening in the United States. So until we see you again, bye-bye. Between Two Teachers.
All right.
Let's turn it off. Wait a minute.